The periscope sliced through black Atlantic waters as Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock adjusted the crosshairs on his target. The merchant vessel wallowed helplessly 3,000 meters away, her cargo holds bulging with American steel destined for Britain. 1 torpedo, 1 kill. The mathematics of victory had never seemed simpler. The survival of Britain and the outcome of the Second World War hung on these midnight encounters beneath the waves. June 4, 1942. The North Atlantic had become Germany's hunting ground, and the hunters were winning. Admiral Dönitz's U-boat fleet prowled these waters like mechanical sharks, their gray hulls cutting through convoy routes with deadly precision. In the cramped control room of U-96, the air hung thick with diesel fumes, cigarette smoke, and the metallic tang of fear sweat. Lehmann-Willenbrock's fingers drummed against the cold steel of the periscope housing as he called out bearing and range to his torpedo crew. Los! The command echoed through the submarine's narrow corridor, and death raced toward its target at 45 knots. The explosion lit the horizon like a brief, terrible sunrise. Another merchant ship joining the graveyard of the Atlantic, her cargo of tanks and ammunition settling into the black depths. Lehmann-Willenbrock lowered his periscope and allowed himself a grim smile, the 43rd kill of his career. And June was barely 4 days old. Across the Wolfpack fleet, similar scenes played out with devastating regularity. U-boat commanders maintained hunting diaries that read like accounting ledgers of destruction. 17 June tanker, 8,000 tons. 21 June freighter, 6,000 tons. 24 June convoy escort, 4,000 tons. The tonnage war, as Dönitz called it, was being won 1 torpedo at a time. The statistics told a story that thrilled the German Naval Command. In June 1942 alone, U-boats would send 144 Allied ships to the bottom over 600,000 tons of desperately needed supplies lost forever. The convoys limped across the Atlantic like wounded animals, their escorts powerless to prevent the slaughter. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill would later admit that the U-boat menace was the only aspect of the war that truly frightened him. Inside the cramped quarters of U-boats, crews endured conditions that would have broken civilian morale within days. The air recycling systems struggled against the humidity of 47 men breathing and sweating in a sealed steel tube. Fresh food spoiled within a week, leaving sailors to subsist on canned black bread, tins of sauerkraut, and bitter ersatz coffee brewed from roasted barley. Hanging sausages and onions in the torpedo room rotted until the stench became unbearable. But the men endured because they were winning. Victory bred confidence. Oberleutnant Zur C. Wolfgang Luth, one of Germany's most successful submarine commanders, wrote in his war diary, "The Atlantic is our ocean now. We strike when we choose, where we choose." The British convoys scatter like fish before sharks. His confidence was shared across the U-boat fleet. Kapitänleutnant Otto Kretschmer boasted of sinking 47 ships. Günther Prien had penetrated the Royal Navy's base at Scapa Flow and sunk a battleship. These were not desperate defensive actions. These were the calculated moves of predators dominating their territory. The German propaganda machine amplified every success. Radio broadcasts celebrated each convoy attacked, each merchant vessel sunk, each ton of Allied supplies sent to the ocean floor. The Wolfpack tactics, multiple submarines converging on a single convoy, seemed unstoppable. Coordinated attacks overwhelmed escort vessels that were too few and spread too thin to protect their charges. Survivors clung to lifeboats in water so cold it killed in minutes, watching their ships disappear beneath the waves, along with the ammunition, food, and fuel that Britain needed to survive. The sight of burning tankers illuminated the night sky like beacons of German dominance. Every explosion represented not just a tactical victory, but proof that the Reich could strangle its enemies through sheer naval superiority. Yet in the shipyards of America, something unprecedented was taking shape, something that would transform hunters into hunted, predators into prey. What the U-boat commanders couldn't see from their periscopes was an industrial revolution unfolding 3,000 miles away, one that would soon flood the Atlantic with more ships than their torpedoes could ever sink. The welding torch hissed against steel plate as sparks cascaded onto the concrete floor of Kaiser Shipyard No. 1. Richmond, California had never heard such sounds. The metallic shriek of cutting torches, the pneumatic thunder of rivet guns, the bass rumble of 500-ton cranes moving prefabricated sections like giant building blocks. The battle for Atlantic supremacy would be won not by torpedoes, but by production lines. September 15, 1941. Henry Kaiser stood on a platform overlooking his newest shipyard, watching welders transform raw steel into vessels of war. The air tasted of hot metal and diesel exhaust, thick with the acrid smoke of acetylene torches burning around the clock. Below him, thousands of workers swarmed over the skeletal frames of ships that would soon carry the tools of victory across submarine-infested waters. Kaiser had built dams and highways, but never ships. His competitors in the established shipyards of Newport News and Bath Iron Works dismissed him as an upstart, a highway contractor with no understanding of naval architecture. They built ships the traditional way, riveted hulls, assembled by craftsmen who had learned their trade over decades. Beautiful vessels that took 8 to 12 months to complete. Kaiser had a different vision entirely. "We're not building yachts," he told his engineers. "We're building cargo haulers. Fast, simple, functional." The Liberty ship design he adopted was deliberately crude, a basic freighter with a triple expansion steam engine that belonged in a museum. Naval architects called it the ugly duckling, but Kaiser saw potential where others saw problems. The breakthrough came through revolutionary manufacturing techniques borrowed from automobile assembly lines. Instead of building ships from the keel up, Kaiser's teams would construct massive prefabricated sections in different parts of the yard. Hull sections weighing hundreds of tons were welded together like enormous puzzle pieces. The bow might be completed in Building A, while the stern took shape in Building C. Then giant cranes would lift both sections and join them with surgical precision. Mass production transformed everything. Kaiser's workers developed their own slang for the process. The prefabricated sections became giant Lego blocks. The welders, many of them women who had never seen a shipyard before the war, earned the nickname Wendy the Welder. These women worked 12-hour shifts in coveralls and hard hats, their welding masks pulled down against showers of sparks that lit the yard like fireworks every night. Rosie Miller, a former secretary from Oakland, wrote in her diary, "My hands shake from the welding torch. My boots are soaked through. But every seam I complete means another ship heading to sea. We work in shifts around the clock. The yard never sleeps, never stops, never slows down." The speed of construction defied every assumption about shipbuilding. Traditional yards measured progress in months. Kaiser measured it in days. The Liberty ship Joseph N. Teal rolled down the ways just 10 days after her keel was laid. The Robert E. Peary would set the ultimate record, 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes from first steel plate to launching ceremony. Time collapsed into statistics that read like fantasy. By December 19, 1941, when Pearl Harbor thrust America fully into the war, Kaiser's emergency shipbuilding program was already producing vessels faster than German intelligence believed possible. The Maritime Commission had ordered 2,700 Liberty ships, more tonnage than the entire German merchant marine. Each ship could carry 10,000 tons of cargo, enough tanks to equip an armored division, enough ammunition to supply an army corps, enough food to feed a city. The scale overwhelmed traditional thinking about naval warfare. Admiral Dönitz's strategy depended on sinking ships faster than they could be replaced. His calculations assumed shipbuilding rates based on pre-war patterns, when vessels were custom-built by skilled craftsmen using traditional methods. The Wolfpack tactics worked because German torpedoes could destroy months of labor in minutes. Kaiser's assembly lines changed the mathematics completely. In the sprawling yards of Richmond, California, and Vancouver, Washington, Liberty ships began sliding down, launching ways with mechanical regularity. 1 ship per day became 2 ships per day, then 3. The launching ceremonies became festivals of American industrial might crowds, gathered to watch champagne bottles smash against gray steel hulls as vessels named after American heroes and foreign allies took to the water. Celebrities christened the ships. Eleanor Roosevelt broke bottles across bows, bearing names like Benjamin Franklin and John Paul Jones. Hollywood stars like Ginger Rogers smiled for newsreel cameras as they launched vessels destined for Murmansk and Liverpool. The symbolism was deliberate. America's entire society mobilized behind the production effort. But the most stunning aspect wasn't the speed, it was the sheer abundance. Materials that would have been hoarded in Germany flowed through Kaiser's yards like water. Steel plates arrived by the trainload. Welding rods were consumed by the ton. The waste alone would have supplied entire German shipyards for months, but American production capacity made efficiency less important than volume. Could any submarine force, no matter how skilled, sink ships faster than American assembly lines could build them? The answer was taking shape in the yards of Richmond and Portland, where the sound of hammers had given way to the hum of industrial machinery operating on a scale the world had never seen. The convoy stretched across New York Harbor like a gray metal river. 100 Liberty ships arranged in precise columns that disappeared into morning haze. Steam whistles shrieked their departure calls, while diesel smoke and coal dust darkened the sky above Manhattan's skyline. The industrial heart of America was beating faster than German torpedoes could stop it. March 20th, 1943, Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock raised his periscope 400 miles east of Cape Cod, scanning the horizon for the convoy his radio operators had been tracking since dawn. 9 months had passed since his triumphant hunting season in the summer of '42, but the Atlantic had changed in ways that defied comprehension. Through his lens, he counted merchant vessels that stretched beyond the periscope's field of view. 40 ships, 60 ships, more than he had sunk in his entire career, sailing together in a single convoy. The mathematics made no sense according to everything German naval intelligence had calculated about Allied shipbuilding capacity. Herr Kalyun, his executive officer, whispered, consulting the identification manual. They appear to be American Liberty ships. All of them. Lehmann-Willenbrock had heard the German propaganda describing these vessels. Kisten, they called them wooden boxes, thrown together by American amateurs who understood nothing about naval architecture. Crude cargo haulers that would break apart in the first Atlantic storm. The Reich's naval experts had dismissed them as propaganda. Surely no nation could build real ships so quickly or in such numbers. Yet here they sailed, 100 strong. In his war diary that night, Lehmann-Willenbrock would write, "The convoy extends beyond visual range. I count vessels faster than I can load torpedoes." Something has changed in this war. Something fundamental that our intelligence failed to predict. The change had been building for months in American shipyards that operated with the efficiency of mechanical clockwork. At Kaiser's Richmond facility, Liberty ships now rolled off the assembly lines faster than the yards could launch them. Multiple vessels were completed simultaneously. Workers cheered as 3 ships slid down parallel, launching ways in a single afternoon, champagne bottles exploding against steel hulls while bands played the national anthem. The production statistics read, like fantasy become reality. In June 1942, when U-boats had achieved their greatest success by sinking 144 Allied ships, American yards had launched more than 140 new vessels the same month. The margin was razor thin, but it represented a fundamental shift in the tonnage war that Admiral Dönitz refused to acknowledge. By March 1943, the numbers had become overwhelming. American shipyards were producing Liberty ships at a rate of 3 vessels per day, faster than the entire German U-boat fleet could sink them, even if every torpedo found its target. The assembly lines never stopped, never slowed, never acknowledged the impossibility of their achievement. Ships became statistics that defied belief. Workers at the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation had perfected their techniques to the point where launching ceremonies became routine spectacles. Families brought picnic lunches to watch the afternoon launch, children waving small American flags as another gray hull met the Columbia River with a tremendous splash. The casual nature of the events reflected a deeper reality. Ship production had become so standardized that individual vessels mattered less than the endless flow of tonnage heading toward the Atlantic. The Liberty ships themselves embodied American industrial philosophy. They were deliberately plain, functional to the point of ugliness, built for utility rather than beauty. Their triple expansion steam engines were obsolete designs that belonged in maritime museums, but they were reliable and simple to manufacture. Their welded hulls could be assembled by workers who had never seen a ship before the war started. German naval observers who studied captured examples dismissed them as inferior vessels that would never survive Atlantic conditions. They were too plain, too crude, too hastily built. Real ships required skilled craftsmen working with traditional methods over months of careful construction. These American Keystone represented everything wrong with democratic industrial methods: quantity over quality, speed over craftsmanship. The dismissal proved catastrophically wrong. Liberty ships absorbed torpedo hits that would have sunk more elegant vessels and limped into port with cargo intact. Their simple designs made battlefield repairs possible with basic welding equipment. Their standardized components meant spare parts were available at every Allied port. What German experts interpreted as crude construction was actually brilliant engineering. Optimal functionality achieved through deliberate simplicity. More devastating still was their sheer abundance. U-boat commanders who had dominated the Atlantic through careful stalking and precise attacks found themselves overwhelmed by targets too numerous to engage. Wolf-pack tactics that had been effective against scattered convoys became meaningless when faced with formations of 100 ships escorted by aircraft carriers, destroyers, and long-range bombers equipped with radar and sonar. Oberleutnant Zur C. Jürgen Osten, whose submarine had terrorized Allied shipping for 2 years, wrote in his personal diary, "We thought ourselves hunters stalking prey through dark waters. Suddenly, we are foxes being pursued by hounds. The convoys no longer scatter. When we attack, they sail through our torpedo spreads like steel avalanches that cannot be stopped." The hunter-prey relationship had reversed completely. U-boats that surfaced to engage convoys found themselves illuminated by aircraft-mounted lee lights, powerful searchlights that turned night into deadly day before bombs began falling. Submarines that dove to escape were pursued by destroyers dropping patterns of depth charges that shattered hull plates and turned the ocean into a killing field of explosive compression waves. What would you do, facing an enemy that replaced every loss faster than you could inflict damage? The psychological impact on U-boat crews became as devastating as the physical danger. Men who had sailed as conquering wolves now huddled in steel coffins, waiting for the depth charges that rattled their submarines until bolts shook loose and light bulbs exploded in showers of glass. The casualty statistics told a story of systematic destruction. By 1943, 85% of U-boat crew members would never return to port. Of 40,900 German submariners who served during the war, 28,000 would die in the steel tombs of their submarines. The hunters had become the hunted in the most complete reversal of fortune in naval history. Yet still, the Liberty ships came, an endless gray procession that filled the Atlantic with more tonnage than German torpedoes could ever sink. The industrial arsenal of democracy had awakened, and its appetite was insatiable. How could submarines fight an enemy that built faster than they could destroy? The depth charges exploded in sequence, each detonation lifting U-175 off the ocean floor before slamming her back down with bone-crushing force. In the control room, Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock watched his submarine die around him as hull plates buckled and seawater sprayed through ruptured seams. The hunters had become the hunted, and the hunt was nearly over. November 3, 1943. The North Atlantic that had once been Germany's private killing ground now swarmed with Allied aircraft and escort vessels equipped with radar, sonar, and unlimited ammunition. Above U-175, the destroyer USS Peary methodically dropped patterns of depth charges that turned the ocean into a three-dimensional minefield of explosive death. Lehmann-Willenbrock's war diary, recovered after his submarine's surrender, recorded the transformation in stark terms. We no longer hunt convoys, we hide from them. The Atlantic has become our graveyard, not our hunting ground. Every periscope observation reveals the same impossible sight. More ships than our entire fleet could sink in a year. Sailing past us like industrial avalanches we cannot stop. The statistics that had once favored German submarines now spelled their doom with mathematical precision. In June 1942, U-boats had sunk 144 Allied vessels. By November 1943, American shipyards were launching 4 Liberty ships every single day, more than 1,400 vessels per year from a single nation's production lines. Admiral Dönitz, architect of the Wolfpack strategy, finally acknowledged the impossible in his private war diary. America builds ships like sausages from a machine. Our torpedoes cannot keep pace with their assembly lines. We face an enemy that replaces losses faster than we can inflict them. The arithmetic of defeat was overwhelming. Germany's entire U-boat fleet consisted of approximately 800 submarines, but fewer than 100 operated in the Atlantic at any given time. Each boat carried 14 torpedoes and required weeks to reach hunting grounds from bases in occupied France. Even if every torpedo found its target an impossible assumption, the German submarine force could sink perhaps 50 ships per month under optimal conditions. American shipyards delivered 120 vessels monthly by 1943, with production still accelerating. The numbers alone guaranteed German defeat, but the reality proved even more devastating. Liberty ships absorbed torpedo hits that would have sunk traditional vessels and continued sailing. Their standardized design meant rapid repairs at any Allied port. Their crude construction actually enhanced survivability. Welded hulls flexed under stress instead of shattering like brittle riveted plates. Industrial warfare had become a mathematics problem that Germany could not solve. In the cramped quarters of surviving U-boats, crews endured conditions that pushed human endurance beyond breaking points. The air recycling system struggled against the humidity of men who hadn't changed clothes in 3 months. Skin infections spread through crews, forced to wear damp uniforms, soaked with diesel fuel and human sweat. The stench of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and mechanical oil created an atmosphere one sailor described as breathing through a sewer pipe filled with machine parts. Fresh food disappeared within days, leaving sailors to subsist on canned black bread that turned moldy in the submarine's humid atmosphere. Hanging sausages and onions rotted until the smell became unbearable, but there was nowhere to discard them except into torpedo tubes during emergency surfacing. The ersatz coffee brewed from roasted barley tasted like burnt dirt, but it provided the only warmth available during depth charge attacks that could last 18 hours. Psychological breakdowns spread through the U-boat fleet faster than mechanical failures. Sailors reported hallucinations during extended, submerged periods. Phantom sounds of music from home, imaginary smells of fresh bread, voices of family members calling from empty compartments. The constant threat of depth charges created a form of combat fatigue that German military medicine had no terminology to describe. Wolfgang Luth, once Germany's most successful submarine commander, wrote his final diary entry on December 15, 1943. "We thought ourselves sharks in these waters. Now we are the fish, hiding in the deepest darkness, while hunters circle above us with instruments that see through steel and water. The war is lost. Not just the battle, the entire war. America has weaponized industrial production. The transformation from predator to prey was complete. U-boats that had terrorized Allied shipping now traveled in carefully plotted routes designed to avoid convoy routes entirely. Submarine commanders who had once boasted of torpedo accuracy now celebrated successful escapes from Allied patrol aircraft. The wolf packs that had coordinated devastating attacks became scattered remnants trying desperately to reach home ports that were themselves under constant bombardment. By 1944, Liberty ships carried more than war supplies across the Atlantic. They transported wounded soldiers back to American hospitals, prisoners of war to inland camps, and entire locomotives to support the reconstruction of Europe. The vessels Germany had dismissed as crude wooden boxes were rebuilding the civilization that U-boats had tried to destroy. The casualty statistics revealed the completeness of German defeat. Of the 759 U-boats destroyed during the war, most were sunk after 1943 hunted down by the same industrial capacity that produced Liberty ships faster than torpedoes could sink them. The 85% casualty rate among U-boat crews represented one of the highest death rates of any military unit in modern warfare. In the end, the Battle of the Atlantic was won not by superior tactics or advanced technology, but by the simple, overwhelming power of American industrial production. Liberty ships represented something more than transportation. They embodied democracy's capacity to mobilize entire societies for sustained effort over years rather than months. The ugly duckling cargo haulers had become the tools of victory in history's longest naval campaign. They carried the ammunition that liberated Europe, the fuel that powered Allied armies, and the hope that sustained nations under siege. More than 2,700 Liberty ships would sail the world's oceans, each one proof that free societies could outproduce totalitarian regimes through voluntary cooperation rather than forced labor. Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock surrendered his submarine on May 8, 1945, the same day Germany officially ended the war. In his final log entry, he wrote, "We began this war believing we were hunters stalking weak prey. We discovered we were facing an industrial colossus that could replace every loss and build beyond our ability to destroy. The Liberty ships were not ships at all. They were America itself, crossing the ocean to deliver victory." The wolves of the Atlantic had been defeated not by other predators, but by an enemy that could build faster than they could sink, produce faster than they could destroy, and replace losses faster than they could inflict them. Industrial democracy had triumphed over military tyranny through the simple power of unlimited production. The shipyards of America had become the arsenal of freedom, and their ugly Liberty ships had carried that freedom across submarine-haunted waters to a world desperate for liberation. The hunters had become the hunted. The hunt was over, and America had won.